The church was the first church built in this town after the Revolution. So it was the mother church of all the other churches. It worshiped in homes for the first some 50 years, and finally in the middle 1800s was able to build the building that is here now. And the church flourished through the 1800s. During the steamboat era, Onancock had a general surge of life because it was a major port to Baltimore. In 1893, did a major improvement when they added stained glass windows and curved pews and a little organ.
For me, the fact that this is early American stained glass is quite unique. There's a certain type of glass within the windows called opalescent glass. It's not transparent, it's more like an opaque glass. That's an original American invention. That started when a guy was making buttons for shirts. And you know buttons are opaque. You don't have transparent buttons. This was 1880s in that vicinity. In 1886, he decided to take that same glass button manufacturing process and make sheets of glass that were then used in the stained glass industry. And that was 1886. These windows were put in 1893. You're talking 7 years from when this invention of sheet glass was created to when these windows were put in. So this has some of the earliest, quote, stained glass in America. The designer is also unique because he went on to then work for Tiffany Studios.
Frederick Wilson was an artist who had grown up in England. His parents were artists. Clearly he must have had some training before he came to the United States in the early 1890s. He had various small jobs apparently for some years, and in 1894 was hired by Tiffany to be his art director. His connection, we did not know that at the beginning when we began restoring windows. We just knew they needed to be done because the glass was buckling, and if it's left too long, the lead puts more and more pressure on the glass and causes it to break.
The elements of a stained glass window are rather simple. There's the glass, there's the lead matrix that holds it together, and there's the putty that's sort of like the mortar between bricks. It sort of holds it all together and keeps it from rattling. The putty will dry out and fall out, so then the window becomes loose. The lead is the biggest problem because, like any product, it needs to be replaced. It deteriorates. There's usually 100-year lifetime span of what lead then should be replaced. And this is right about that 100-year, 120-year time frame. So the lead is deteriorated to the point where it was literally falling apart, cracking and falling apart. The window, being in a wooden frame, is in a compressed state. So it doesn't look bad. Once you take the stained glass panel out of its wooden frame, it literally falls apart. So the glass is good. Glass doesn't really deteriorate. Egyptian glass from 5,000 years ago, a good example. The glass is good. The lead just needed to be replaced. So you're just making a new window using the old glass. And this is what they would have looked like 120 years ago.
All of the funds for window restoration were done by people who either did it as a memorial or the community foundation. So 5 of the windows were originally restored, all as memorials to individuals. And then following that, the Eastern Shore Community Foundation actually graciously provided the funding for 4 additional windows. So that took care of 9 of the 12, and there were 3 remaining windows. And the 3 remaining windows were done in memory of Millie Mason, in memory of Kirk Mariner, in memory of my wife Paige. So they are the final 3, and now all 12 have been done.
The history of the stained glass in the United States started really around the 1880s time frame, and with the change from the Victorian style, very rigid, to the Art Nouveau style, which Tiffany really promoted and marketed. It was a much more feminine looking style, and people really enjoyed it. The explosion of the population around 1900, with the inner cities, houses being close to one another, they needed stained glass windows for a little bit of privacy. So over your stairways and over doors and things of that nature, stained glass was a natural commodity to do that. During the 20s and 30s, it started to die off, especially with the war, because lead makes bullets. Consequently, during World War II, a lot of the lead was shipped off to make the bullets. So that started to die. But when the World War II ended and the guys came back from the campaigns, they started to have families in the suburbs, and they wanted to also go back to church, built their own churches. We had a lot of immigration after World War II from people of Europe, and they wanted their churches to remind them of their hometowns. England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy. So those communities, that's why if you go to small towns, the Italian church looks like an Italian church, a German church looks like a German church, because they wanted to have the memory of when they were growing up, or a memory of their parents and grandparents. So there was a great influx of stained glass during the late 40s and through the early 60s, and then it started to die off again. Quote unquote, the hippies of the late 60s really brought it back because they loved the free-flowing colors, especially of that opalescent glass that I spoke of earlier. And it really lent to a very free style of artwork, and it became very, very popular, especially the sun catchers, the things you hang in your kitchen window or living room window, was very popular in those 60s and 70s. And it started to grow again. People had more money, more churches again were being built. Offices started to incorporate stained glass windows, homes, high-end homes, restaurants. It just kept going and going. And just like any cycle, it started to die off again in the late 1990s and through the 2000s, when people started to be tired of being walled in. The reaction to church being, quote, a secret society, even church itself, they wanted to see the universe. They wanted to put God in the universe. They wanted to see outside. God was in nature. They wanted to be able to see that and enjoy their religion by looking at nature. So stained glass has consequently been going less and, dying off slower and slower. We're, in 2010 through 2019, it has dramatically, worldwide, been reduced, 80%. It's just, there isn't the interest in it anymore. People have the misconception that stained glass is only for churches. It's not. It's a colorful application that could be placed anywhere. Unfortunately, it's expensive. It's labor intensive. There's no real machines producing these things. You can't automate it. It's all done by hand. So we're fighting modernism and technology to maintain a rather medieval craft. There's not much difference between what we do today than what was done 1,000 years ago.
If you're not an expert in the windows, you probably don't notice really the deterioration. I mean, they weren't cracking or falling apart, so to speak, but the thing you really notice is, since they've been restored, how much more brilliance there is. The light is so incredibly improved. So their beauty had been somewhat lost, and the beauty has been reinstated. Today, it's kind of a critical part of what goes on in Onancock and what goes on the Eastern Shore. Today, it's a cultural center, it's a community center, and it's a religious center. And that's why restoring it was so important. Because you would like for that history to continue on for another 100 years. And what's been done to the windows in particular, and to the rest of the building, and the few projects that remain, will really make it a significant part of the future of Onancock and the Eastern Shore.